Hi apes! Welcome to your first flipped lecture for our AP Environmental Science course. I'm really excited you're in my class this year and it's going to be a great year. As I mentioned, we'll use these flipped lectures so that you can take some of the notes and do some of the lectures at home, which will free up time for activities and labs and things like that while we're here in class together. Remember that when you're watching these videos, I want you to take notes, and we'll have a quiz that covers the lecture, and whatever notes you take while you watch it, you can use those notes on the quiz. So practice good note-taking skills and keep that opening activity that we did in mind, the origami cranes. The instructions got a little complicated and went really quickly. So remember, you can go at your own pace. You can pause the video, you can rewind it, you can start it over as many times as you want. I'll try to keep these videos as short as possible. They should never be more than 5 or 10 minutes long. Another good thing about these flipped lectures is when we get closer to our AP exam time, these lectures will be good for you to go back over and review some of the more complicated material or things that you might be struggling with. In class today, we talked about these major 5 environmental indicators, and these are things that environmental scientists look at to determine how healthy an ecosystem is. And these are like 5 themes that we'll go into a lot more detail as we go throughout the different units during this chapter. But we've got biological diversity, food production, global temperature, carbon dioxide concentrations, the human population, and resource depletion. So again, these are 5 global environmental indicators that scientists use to determine the current state or how healthy an environment is. Biodiversity is going to be all the diversity, all the different kinds of living things, the life forms that are in an environment. And a lot of times when we think of biodiversity, we just think of different types of animals, different types of plants. But we also need to remember, so that what that is that's called species diversity, the different kinds of plants or animals and living things in an area. But there's also biodiversity at the genetic level and at the ecosystem level. Here's a diagram that demonstrates the different levels of diversity. So this middle one, the species diversity, is what we normally think of when we hear biodiversity. We've got different animals, different plants, different biotic living things in an area. But we also have genetic diversity within a population. So our eye color, our hair color, all our different genetic variations within a population. And then if you look up here, we've got ecosystem diversity. And we talked about in class how our state, the state of Alabama, is the 3rd most biodiverse state in our country. And that's because we have so many different ecosystems, including mountains, many freshwater systems, rivers, streams, lakes. We have oceans. So we have a wide variety of ecosystems that supports an environment for many different living organisms. So when we're looking at genetic diversity, we're looking at the individual genetic level, like what are the different genes? Is there a high diversity of genes? Is there a low genetic diversity? Typically, populations that have more of a variety of genes, a genetic diversity, those populations are going to be better suited and better able to survive some kind of environmental change that might occur. So maybe a change in temperature, a change in pH, a change in the amount of sunlight that an area usually gets. So populations with high genetic diversity are better equipped, better able to survive environmental changes than those with lower genetic diversity. A good example of this is a population of deer that lives in a really cold mountainous area. So let's say this population of deer, there's some deer that have thin fur, and there's some deer that have really thick fur. Well, this extremely cold, colder than ever before winter happens, and the deer that have the thin fur, they're not able to survive. They freeze to death. The only deer in this population that live are the ones that have the thick fur. And so because they had that gene for the thick fur, that deer population, they were able to have some survivors that lived and that was able to pass down that gene for more thick fur. So eventually, this is basically evolution. Eventually, the thick fur deer are all that's left and all that are able to reproduce, because the thin fur deer, they just didn't have the genetics, the gene for thin fur, or the gene for thick fur, so they froze to death and they weren't able to survive and pass down their genes. If this population of deer had if they were all thin fur, then none of them would have survived that winter. Like, that population of deer would have been completely wiped out. So because they had a higher genetic diversity, they had different kinds of genes. Some of them had thick fur, some of them had thin fur. So they were better suited to survive, at least some of them. So a species is a group of organisms that is distinct from other groups in how its body's formed, its body structure, how it behaves, and its different biochemical properties. That's a species. And species diversity is the number of different species in an area or a particular type of habitat. So this next word, speciation, is talking about the evolution of new species. And this is a really slow process. So speciation means the evolution of new species, like new species evolving from old ones. This is a really slow process, and so new species usually evolve about 1 to 3 new species a year worldwide. So it's a really slow process. Background extinction rate is the average rate at which species are becoming extinct, and that also is a really, really slow process. About 1 species in a million are going to go extinct every year. Sometimes under certain environmental conditions or environmental stresses, species may become extinct quicker than new ones are evolving. Some scientists actually estimate that 1,000 species are currently going extinct every year, so that's actually 500 times the background rate of extinction. And some of the biggest reasons for this is habitat destruction, habitat degradation, in addition to climate change, over-harvesting, over-hunting, and overfishing, and then pressure from introduced species, invasive species that contribute to species loss and extinction. With ecosystem diversity, this is the different variety, the different types of ecosystems and habitats in an area. So the greater variety of healthy and productive ecosystems, the healthier the environment. The next global indicator is food production. So a healthy soil is going to support abundant and continuous food production. But when we have such a huge increase in our human population, it puts a major strain on our soil and our ability to grow and to provide adequate amounts of food to support such a large population. If you look at this graph, it's showing world grain production per person. Per capita means per person. And so pretty steadily since 1950, we've seen an increase in grain production. And that could be from the development of new fertilizers, new irrigation techniques, different crop varieties, and other innovations. But since then, we've seen a slight decline, and the grain production can no longer keep up with our current population growth. This could be from various factors. It could be from soil degradation, different crop diseases, unfavorable weather conditions like drought and flooding. It could also be just the demand is outpacing the supply. Like, the supply can't keep up with the amount of people that need the grain, the demand for the grain. So biodiversity and abundant food production are absolutely necessary for life. And one of the things that makes those possible is a stable climate. Earth's temperature has been relatively constant since the earliest forms of life began about 3.5 billion years ago. The temperature of our planet allows the presence of liquid water, which is necessary for life. Greenhouse gases also help keep our Earth's atmosphere at a range of temperature where life can flourish. In the past 2 centuries, the past 200 years or so, our carbon dioxide levels and our other greenhouse gases in the atmosphere have continued to rise. And many scientists believe that this rise in carbon dioxide levels is anthropogenic, meaning that it's man-made, like it's from human-caused activities. The 2 major sources of anthropogenic carbon dioxide are the combustion of fossil fuels and the net loss of forests and other habitats that would otherwise take up and store the carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. So when you cut down trees and things like that, more carbon dioxide gets into the atmosphere because you no longer have the trees there to soak that in. This figure is showing how the surface of our planet is warmed by the sun, and then we have greenhouse gases that help trap some of that heat to keep and reflect some back out, so that the temperature range here on the planet where life exists is within a certain range where life can flourish and life can exist. So without these greenhouse gases, we would not be able to support the life that we have here on the planet. This chart is showing that just over the last 100 years, we've seen a steady increase in global surface temperature. Here's global surface temperature on this side of the graph, and carbon dioxide in parts per million on this side. So over the past 100 years especially, we've seen an increase in both of those levels, an increase in temperature and in carbon dioxide concentrations. The next global indicator is human population. Currently, this slide's a little outdated, but currently our human population is at about 7.4 billion, and it's still growing. So this increasing world population, it places additional demands on our natural systems, and each of these new systems is going to require food, water, and other resources. In any given 24-hour period, so in any given day, 387,000 infants are born and 155,000 people die. So that's a net result of 232,000 new inhabitants on Earth every day and over 1 million additional people every 5 days. So how can our planet sustain so many people? Even if the human population stops growing, the billions of additional people are going to put a greater demand on Earth's finite resources, like our natural resources that we could possibly run out of, including our food, energy, and land. The final global indicator that we're going to talk about is resource depletion. Our natural resources are going to be what provides the energy and materials that support human civilization. But as the human population grows, the resources that are necessary for our survival become increasingly depleted, like we run out of them. In addition, extracting natural resources can affect the health of our environment in lots of ways. So pollution and land degradation caused by mining, for example, waste from discarded manufactured products, and air pollution from the combustion of fossil fuels are just a few of the negative environmental consequences that come from extracting resources and using them. Renewable resources like timber, trees, they can be grown and harvested indefinitely if done and managed the right way. Per capita is going to mean per person, and we'll use that phrase a lot, per capita. Development is going to influence personal and collective human lifestyles. So a development means an improvement in human well-being through economic advancement. Like the United States is a developed country. We're economically advanced. A poverty-stricken country that doesn't have systems in place like waste management and water treatment, that would be known as a developing country. So development is going to influence our personal and our collective human lifestyle. So the things that, the cars we want to drive, the clothes we want to wear, the amount of meat that we have in our diet, the availability and use of technology such as cell phones and computers. So as economies develop, resource consumption also increases. So the more developed the country, the more resources are used and the more waste is developed as a result. So people drive more automobiles, we live in larger homes, we purchase more goods. So these increases can often have implications for our natural environment. More people buying more stuff, generating more waste that has to be dealt with. And those are the 5 global environmental indicators.